So Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is a it's an okay Ghostbusters film, which at this point I think for Ghostbusters fans that's kind of like a mild win, because like it felt like the past Ghostbusters films were either trying too hard to recapture the past or trying too hard to be divergent but also be nostalgic at the same time. Because there have been problems with the Ghostbusters films in the past. Like the previous film, Ghostbusters Afterlife, I had the biggest problems with because it had a lot of potential. I like the fact that they took this story about like the Spangler family and brought it out of the city and into a small town where they have to hunt down ghosts, which I thought had a lot of promise to it, and I like the characters that they set up. But unfortunately, when you get to like the second half of the film, it just goes back to nostalgia, because then they have to fight Gozer again. They bring up all these old lines, they bring back all the old Ghostbusters, and then they do the worst thing that they could possibly do in the film, is they CGI'd a ghost version of Harold Ramis to reprise his role as Egon in the film. So yeah, that left a nasty taste in my mouth, and I really didn't like Afterlife at all. I didn't like, not to the same degree, but I also didn't like the 2016 Ghostbusters reboot, mostly just because I don't feel like the jokes landed. I like the idea of trying to pass the torch onto a new brand of Ghostbusters, but it felt like it just wasn't hitting. Like, it felt like it was being trying to be a little bit like, I don't quite want to say like too divergent, but it felt like it was going in a different direction and didn't quite embrace it as well as it should. And I think a big problem with that is that it was diced up, especially for the theatrical cut, because I have seen the director's cut of 2016's Ghostbusters, and it is mildly better. Like, it's more cohesive than the theatrical version, which just felt like a mess. So yeah, the Ghostbusters, the past two films have been a mess, especially Afterlife. It was just like the grossest form of nostalgia. And Frozen Empire feels like almost like a compromise. It feels like it is going forward with the characters they established in Afterlife, which is good, because I actually did like the Spangler family, and I love how they kind of build them up as this family that has a history of being involved with the paranormal and has a little bit of a fascination with it. But then it also tries to satisfy what fans have come to know about Ghostbusters by bringing the story back to New York. They bring it back to the firehouse, and then they bring back all the old cast, which will probably appease like longtime fans who just want to see the old Ghostbusters crew again. And if you're worried that there's like a ghost Harold Ramis again, there isn't, which immediately makes the film a little bit better for me. But the biggest problem with this film is that, like, the new crew, like the Spangler family who takes over the Ghostbusters operations, and the old Ghostbusters crew are kind of like in the background now, but also kind of working like R&D and kind of like support the Ghostbusters here and there. There's this battle between them where it's like they're both fighting to occupy the screen, and it's a case where there's too many characters and there's too many arcs, and there's not enough time to get to know or love these characters, which sucks, because like I feel like, like we've gotten a lot of like the other characters here. Like, we've gotten enough, I think, of like of Winston and Ray and Peter. We've got enough like Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Ernie Hudson, but we haven't got a lot of the Spangler family, and there's a lot of potential there, because the film sets it up where there is good conflict for them. Like, the whole idea is that the Spangler family, mostly comprised of Phoebe, played by McKenna Grace, who's the youngest member of the family, Finn Wolfhard playing Trevor, who's like the oldest sibling of the family, Callie Spangler, played by Carrie Coon, who's trying to be a single mother, and then you have the addition of Paul Rudd as Gary Guberson, who is basically, their new dad, but trying to like get used to the role of becoming a father. So there's lots to build on from there. And the film even has those elements that it could build on. Like, I love the fact that, like, Paul Rudd, who's like kind of like this goofy character who's trying to get more used to being a dad and assert himself. I think there's a handful of good moments with him. The way that Callie is struggling as a parent to assert her dominance while managing this Ghostbusters business, I thought was pretty cool. And especially, like, it felt like a lot of more attention should have been paid on Phoebe, because she is fascinated by ghosts, but feels like, because she's underage, she's not as well utilized as a Ghostbuster now that they have the operation up and running. So there's this fascinating arc where she befriends a ghost and starts learning a little bit more about the ghost world and tries to find a trust and kinship where there isn't one within the human world. And then, like, and here's, like, the biggest problem. Because there's so much else going on, the film doesn't find much to do with Trevor. Like, Trevor is mostly just reduced to this sub-arc of tracking down Slimer. And that's it. That's all there is. It's just Trevor hunting Slimer across the firehouse, and that's it. Like, there's nothing else going on there. And then, occupying more of the screen, you have, I will say this. If you didn't like the fact that Peter, Ray, and Winston in the previous Ghostbusters film just showed up to spout a few lines, like, you wanted them to be a little bit more involved than just making, like, third act cameos, you will probably like this film, because all three of them take a much more active role in this film. Like, you have Winston as a playing more on the political side, keeping the Ghostbusters out of jail. You have Ray, of course, showing more of his paranormal expertise and offering, like, divulging a lot of the lore behind the ghosts that they're trapping. And then you have Peter mostly just doing the stuff that people love Bill Murray for in this role, which is, like, testing people, testing them for psychic abilities and messing with them during tests. So mostly just they're doing the same stuff that they've always done, which is fine in bits and pieces, but they take up so much of the screen time that the Spengler family has to share it with them. And the thing is, like, I haven't even got to the plot yet just because there's too much going on. But the plot is, like, that there is also, like, another cool element here where you have the Ghostbusters trying to track this very old god that can apparently like take people's fear and turn it into basically ice. Like, he basically, like, freezes all of New York City, and he has ice powers. And he's got this fairly intimidating look to him, where it looks like a character that I would imagine from, like, the real Ghostbusters cartoon, which is a plus there. So it's playing a little bit more to the nostalgia, but it also feels a little bit more original because, it doesn't just feel like the derivative stuff of the past Ghostbusters film, where it doesn't have to rely on, like, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man or Gozer or a Gozer-like type villain. This does feel like an original villain all its own. But, much like the Spengler family, this villain is not given enough time to occupy the screen and become more interesting beyond just, like, the powers to, like, freeze all of New York City, which is cool on the surface, but you would hope that because there is lore to this character, and I was hoping that they would play up more on it and that the character would have a little bit more personality, but unfortunately there's not much time for that. In fact, there's not a lot of time in this film that I don't feel like there's enough time for any of the primary characters to be funny. And I say that only because I feel like the characters who get in the best laughs of the film are the comedic actors who are brought in as backup. So another character who plays a big role within the finale is Nadim, played by Kumail Nanjiani. Who's fairly good at, like, easing himself into comedy, so he has a few good laughs here. You also have Patton Oswalt playing a professor at a library who divulges more of the lore, but he has a much more giddy sensation to it. Like this is the type of character who I almost wish, because Ray has, like, a teenage apprentice working for him, but I almost wish that Patton Oswalt's character was working for him, because he's so much more eccentric, he's so much more into this stuff, and he gets in a lot of funnier lines. And it dawned on me like even with like the addition of all like the other nostalgic characters, like you have Annie Potts back as Janine, which I will say this: if you want to see Janine as a Ghostbuster, you will get that in this film. So that's like, if that's like on your Ghostbusters nostalgia bucket list, there it is. Also William Atherton as Walter Peck, who mostly just does the exact same role. He just comes in and blusters like, "Oh, I'm gonna get those Ghostbusters." But the fact that like the most hilarious characters in this film are Patton Oswalt and Kumail Nanjiani, it feels like it feels like the Ghostbusters can't be the comedic force that they were in the 1984 film, because like there was a natural comedy that came with the Ghostbusters here, and now it feels like there's not enough time to explore these characters and for them to make jokes, that you got to rely on these like simpler, smaller characters for like the comedic backup. So like the way I've described this in my reviews is like, imagine if like in the original Ghostbusters, like all four of like the primary comedic actors never made any jokes, and they just relied on other comedic actors to come in and provide the comedy. Because that's what it feels like. Like, I know that wasn't the intent here, obviously. I'm not trying to, like, downgrade the film to that degree. But, because, like, they definitely were trying with Paul Rudd here. But so much of the comedy just kind of, like, falls flat from them that it almost feels like it's necessary to have Kumail and Patton come in and, provide, like, some extra jokes. Just so that it doesn't get lost in the nostalgia. And it's one of those, I'm conflicted because it's one of those films that I don't want to praise it just for what it doesn't do, but after everything that happened in Whiplash, I was having Whiplash from Ghostbusters Afterlife, but after everything that happened in Ghostbusters Afterlife, the nostalgia elements here are more restrained. Like, I love the fact that like there's a lot of Easter eggs here and there, but most of them are kept fairly far into like the background where they don't interfere. Like at one point, when Ray is like managing all the stuff, they mention like mood slime in the background that they had to move it around, and there's no like close up of the mood slime from Ghostbusters 2. They don't talk about it. It's not a big deal. It's in the background, which is how I feel like good nostalgic Easter eggs should be. But every now and then, there's a few times in the film where it has to slow down and stop and remind you something. Like at one point, the Ghostbusters visit a library, and they run into the same ghost in the library from one of the earliest scenes from the first Ghostbusters film. And it's just like, okay, like it's a brief stop. Like it doesn't like completely derail the movie, but it's like it's a 30-second stop. Or just like, okay, yeah, I remember this moment. Do we have to stop here? Do I have to see Dan Aykroyd, scream at the same ghost again? It's like, so yeah, like the nostalgia is much more restrained than it is in the previous films. If you don't count the usage of the original Ghostbusters here. So I'm very torn about this film because I love the other stuff they add to this film. Like they explore a little bit more of the ghost tech. The lore behind the villain is fascinating. The dynamic between the Spengler family is pretty good. And there's like, it's all these elements that are really good. And they could be great. They could make a really good film if they had more time to breathe, if they weren't, there weren't so many characters crowding the screen, and just given more time to let these characters be, instead of being in a rush to capture the next ghost and stop the next villain. So I'm very conflicted. Like on a surface level, the film is fine. Like it's got enough horror elements where I feel like kids will be able to come in and enjoy this film. And it's got just enough nostalgic elements that don't, like overflow in the film. Where I feel like most adults who remember Ghostbusters will come in with their kids and be like, oh yeah, I remember that stuff. I'm kind of glad they had that little nod here and there. But all things considered, like it seems like it seems like this is as good as Ghostbusters is gonna get at this point. Because like it's trying to be in like this Goldilocks zone of being not too nostalgic, but not too divergent and original and new. And it kind of meets somewhere in the middle. And I guess for fans who want like a decent Ghostbusters film that respects them enough but takes enough chances, that might be fine. But it ultimately just comes up as kind of just generic for me, because like, you know, when we're not given enough time to explore these characters, and the new ones literally have to share as much screen time as the old ones, it just kind of comes off a little bit as a wash, almost kind of like as a generic blockbuster. So it's probably the best Ghostbusters film we're gonna get at this point, you know, considering everything that happened after Ghostbusters 2. But still, on that level, it still feels like it's not living up to its full potential. So yeah, it's an okay Ghostbusters film. Like, if you really just want those nostalgic pains and you want like a horror film you can watch with your kids, this is not a bad film. It's not a great Ghostbusters film.